The CEO mocked the single dad's rusty tools. Then her $2 billion factory couldn't run without him. The moment a powerful chief executive officer laughed at the rusty tools carried by a quiet single father, everyone inside the $2 billion factory believed they had already decided exactly who he was. To them, he looked like an aging maintenance worker holding onto worn-out equipment that should have been thrown away years ago. No one imagined those weathered tools would soon become the only reason the entire production facility could operate again, leaving an executive team, experienced engineers, and hundreds of employees standing together in stunned silence. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Before we continue with this unforgettable story of quiet strength, hidden brilliance, and earned respect, we would like to ask one small favor. If you enjoy meaningful stories that celebrate dignity, kindness, and second chances, please subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you will always be among the first to see every new video we share. Your support costs nothing, takes only a moment, and helps us continue creating heartfelt and inspiring stories for viewers around the world. We truly appreciate every one of you. We would also love to know where you are watching from today. Share your city or country in the comments below so we can welcome our amazing audience from across the globe. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. Now, let us return to our story and discover why one old toolbox changed everything inside a factory that money alone could not save. Throw those rusty tools away, the chief executive officer said loud enough for everyone on the factory floor to hear. A $2 billion manufacturing plant deserves better than antiques. The laughter that followed was not cruel, but it was loud enough to make dozens of employees glance toward the quiet maintenance technician standing beside an old steel toolbox whose faded blue paint had nearly disappeared beneath years of honest work. Nathan Walker simply looked down at the worn wrench resting in his hand before placing it carefully back inside the box. He neither defended himself nor challenged the woman who had just embarrassed him in front of engineers, supervisors, and production managers. Instead, he closed the lid gently and offered a respectful nod. If these tools still solve the problem, he said calmly, they still have value. The enormous production building fell strangely quiet for just a moment before conversations resumed. Above them, bright white industrial lights reflected across polished stainless steel equipment stretching hundreds of feet through the facility. Robotic arms moved with perfect precision. Conveyor systems carried unfinished components beneath rows of automated inspection cameras. Computer monitors displayed production data in real time, while the steady rhythm of motors and hydraulic systems blended into the familiar heartbeat of one of the most advanced manufacturing plants in America. Claire Donovan stood near the center of it all, confident and composed in a tailored Navy business suit. As the founder and chief executive officer of Donovan Advanced Manufacturing, she had built the company into a global leader supplying precision equipment for aerospace, medical technology, and energy industries. Every minute of production inside the massive facility represented thousands of dollars in revenue, and every decision she made affected hundreds of employees. She believed excellence required high standards, modern technology, and constant innovation. An old toolbox simply did not belong in the future she had spent years creating. Replace every outdated tool before next quarter, she instructed the operations director without looking back at Nathan. We cannot present ourselves as industry leaders while maintenance still works with equipment older than some of our employees. The director nodded immediately, making a note on his tablet. Nathan quietly lifted his toolbox from the concrete floor. The steel handle had become smooth from decades of use, and several of the sockets had been repaired more than once instead of replaced. To anyone else, it looked like scrap metal waiting for retirement. To Nathan, every tool carried the memory of problems solved, machines restored, and long nights spent making certain production never stopped. Before he could walk away, a cheerful voice echoed across the aisle. "Dad." 9-year-old Lily Walker hurried toward him carrying a small insulated lunch bag decorated with bright wildflowers. Her blonde ponytail bounced with every step, and her smile seemed completely untouched by the uncomfortable moment everyone else had witnessed. "You almost forgot your lunch again," she said, catching her breath. Nathan smiled warmly as he accepted the bag. "Good thing someone around here remembers the important things." Lily looked curiously at the people still watching them. "Did something happen?" Nathan gently rested his hand on her shoulder. "Nothing worth carrying home," he answered softly. Claire happened to overhear those words as she turned toward another group of executives. For reasons she could not explain, they lingered in her thoughts longer than the laughter had. Nathan picked up his weathered toolbox with one hand and Lily's lunch with the other before quietly walking toward the older section of the factory where the original production lines still operated every day, unaware that before the afternoon was over, the very tools everyone had dismissed would become the only reason the heart of the entire factory could keep beating. The older production hall carried a different rhythm from the modern assembly lines at the front of the facility. The polished robotic systems gave way to massive precision machines built decades earlier, each one maintained so carefully that they still produced components measured to thousandths of an inch. Their steel frames bore the marks of years of dependable service, and their steady mechanical hum echoed through the spacious building like a familiar heartbeat. Nathan Walker paused beside one of the machining centers and gently set his weathered toolbox on the concrete floor. Before opening it, he unpacked the lunch Lily had brought him and placed the small paper bag on a nearby workbench. "Did you remember to eat breakfast this morning?" Lily asked with the seriousness only a child could manage. Nathan smiled as he removed an apple from the bag. "Because I know someone was going to ask me that." "Question, yes." Lily laughed softly before taking out a homemade sandwich wrapped neatly in wax paper. "Grandma said you work better after lunch." Nathan chuckled. "Your grandmother has been giving me good advice for many years." As they shared a quiet meal together, several younger maintenance technicians walked past carrying tablets loaded with digital diagnostic software. One of them glanced at Nathan's toolbox before nudging his coworker with a grin. "I cannot believe he still carries those museum pieces," he whispered. Another laughed quietly. "Maybe management will finally replace them after this morning." Nathan heard every word, but continued eating without responding. Lily looked at him curiously. "Does it bother you when people laugh?" she asked. Nathan folded the empty sandwich wrapper before answering. "People usually laugh at things they do not understand yet." She thought about that for a moment. "So you are not angry?" He gently shook his head. Being angry never repaired a machine. Lily smiled proudly because she had heard similar lessons many times before. After lunch, Nathan carefully organized each tool inside the box. Every wrench rested in exactly the same place. Every screwdriver had been cleaned after years of use. The polished handles showed thousands of hours spent solving problems that most people never noticed because the machines simply kept running. One young engineer entered the production hall carrying a laptop and stopped near Nathan's work area. "Mr. Walker," he said politely, "I still do not understand why you never use the new predictive maintenance software." Nathan looked up with a friendly expression. "The software is excellent," he replied. "It catches problems that are difficult to see." The engineer nodded. "Then why keep using the old methods?" Nathan reached out and rested one hand on the side of the large machining center. He closed his eyes for a brief second, listening to the steady rhythm of gears, bearings, and hydraulic pressure. "Because machines speak before they fail," he answered quietly. "You only have to learn how to listen." The engineer looked puzzled but remained thoughtful as he walked away. A few minutes later, Nathan tightened one small fastener with the same rusty wrench Claire Donovan had mocked earlier that morning. The faint vibration inside the machine immediately became smoother, almost impossible for anyone else to notice, but obvious to him. Lily clapped softly. "It sounds happier now." Nathan smiled. "That is because someone finally listened." At that very moment, a sharp warning tone echoed from the opposite end of the factory. Bright yellow alarm lights began flashing above the newest production line, and within seconds the steady sound of automated manufacturing came to an abrupt stop. One conveyor after another fell silent until the enormous building stood in an unfamiliar stillness. Employees froze where they stood. Supervisors reached for their radios. Across the factory floor, Claire Donovan turned toward the darkened production line as an operations manager rushed toward her with urgency written across his face. "Ma'am," he said, struggling to catch his breath, "the primary production system has completely shut down." Warning sirens echoed through the enormous production hall as bright amber lights continued flashing above the primary manufacturing line. The steady rhythm that had filled the factory only moments earlier disappeared, replaced by an unfamiliar silence that immediately unsettled everyone inside the building. Robotic arms froze in mid-cycle. Conveyor belts stopped without warning. Digital control panels displayed rows of red diagnostic alerts while operators stared helplessly at their monitors. Claire Donovan walked quickly toward the center of the shutdown area with the operations director and several senior engineers close behind. "Status," she said firmly. The operations director looked at his tablet before answering. "The entire primary production line is offline. Every backup sequence failed to restart the system." Claire's expression hardened. "How much are we losing?" "Approximately $200,000 every hour," he replied. "If we miss tonight's aerospace shipment, the penalties could be much higher." Claire immediately turned toward the engineering team. "Find a failure. I do not care how long it takes." Within minutes, laptops covered nearby workstations as engineers connected diagnostic equipment to every major controller. Technical specialists joined emergency conference calls with software developers from 3 different states. Factory supervisors coordinated maintenance crews, while production managers contacted waiting customers with carefully worded delay notices. Everyone moved quickly, yet every attempted solution ended with the same disappointing result. The production line refused to start. Nathan Walker quietly arrived near the edge of the growing crowd, carrying his weathered steel toolbox. Lily remained beside him, holding his lunch bag with both hands. Neither of them stepped into the middle of the emergency. Nathan simply watched the machines with calm attention, listening more than looking. A young engineer noticed him and smiled politely. "Mr. Walker, this problem is inside the automated control system. We have software specialists handling it." Nathan nodded respectfully. "I understand." Another technician glanced at the rusty wrench visible inside Nathan's toolbox and chuckled under his breath. "I do not think a wrench from the last century is going to fix this." Several people nearby quietly laughed before returning to their computer screens. Nathan showed no sign of offense. He rested one hand lightly against a support column beside the silent production line and listened to the stillness that had replaced the familiar mechanical rhythm. Lily tugged gently on his sleeve. "Can you hear something?" she whispered. Nathan smiled softly. "Sometimes what disappears tells you as much as what remains." Claire continued receiving updates from every department. None were encouraging. One senior automation consultant finally lowered his headset with visible frustration. "The software is responding normally," he admitted. "The controllers are functioning. The sensors are communicating. We cannot identify the fault." Claire folded her arms as she looked across the motionless production line stretching hundreds of feet through the facility. "Then something is being missed." No one answered. The silence became heavier with every passing second. Nathan slowly walked closer, stopping just outside the marked safety boundary. He did not interrupt anyone. He simply watched one inactive drive assembly near the beginning of the line. His eyes followed the alignment of several connected shafts before settling on a single, housing almost everyone else had ignored because no error code pointed toward it. After another quiet moment, he spoke in the same calm voice he had used all morning. "May I ask one question?" Claire turned toward him. Several engineers exchanged uncertain looks. "Go ahead," she said. Nathan pointed toward the silent drive assembly. "Before anyone changes another line of software," he said gently, "has anyone listened to the machine itself?" The engineers looked at one another in puzzled silence. And for the first time since the shutdown began, not a single person had an immediate answer. Nathan Walker waited quietly while the engineers continued studying lines of diagnostic code that refused to explain why an entire production line had suddenly gone silent. The flashing warning lights reflected across polished steel equipment, filling the massive factory with an uneasy amber glow. Every minute that passed deepened the pressure. Supervisors spoke rapidly into radios. Operations managers checked delivery schedules with growing concern. The distant sound of forklifts moving unfinished inventory only emphasized how completely the primary manufacturing system had stopped. Claire Donovan looked at Nathan for a long moment before answering his question. "No," she admitted. "We have trusted the diagnostics." Nathan nodded respectfully. "May I have 5 minutes?" Several engineers exchanged doubtful looks. One of the younger automation specialists folded his arms. "With respect, Mr. Walker, this is not a mechanical problem. The entire control architecture has been analyzed." Nathan smiled gently. "Then 5 minutes should not hurt anything." The engineer shook his head with a quiet laugh. unless you plan on fixing a software network with that rusty wrench. A few nearby technicians smiled, remembering the chief executive officer's comment from earlier that morning. Nathan did not respond. Claire studied his calm expression before making a decision. 5 minutes, she said. Nothing more. Nathan thanked her with a simple nod. He carried his weathered toolbox across the safety line and stopped beside the silent drive assembly he had noticed earlier. Instead of opening a laptop or connecting a diagnostic cable, he slowly removed the same worn wrench Claire had mocked only hours before. Lily stood quietly outside the work area, watching her father with complete confidence. She had seen that calm focus many times before whenever something needed to be repaired. Nathan placed one hand against the machine's heavy steel frame and closed his eyes for several seconds. The engineers watched in confused silence. One whispered, "What is he doing?" An older maintenance supervisor answered quietly, "Listening." Nathan moved slowly along the drive assembly, resting his fingertips against bearing housings, support brackets, and coupling mounts. He gently rotated one exposed shaft by hand only a fraction of an inch before stopping immediately. He listened again. Then he crouched beside a gearbox that every diagnostic report had labeled fully operational. Using the old wrench, he loosened one inspection cover just enough to examine the alignment beneath it. He looked up calmly. "Please do not restart the line." One engineer sighed impatiently. "We already know the gearbox is healthy." Nathan shook his head politely. "The gearbox is healthy. The coupling behind it is not." Several engineers frowned. The lead automation specialist checked his tablet again. "There is no sensor reporting a coupling fault." Nathan nodded. "Because the coupling has not failed electronically. It shifted mechanically." The room grew noticeably quieter. Nathan pointed toward a narrow alignment sleeve hidden behind the housing. "A retaining collar has moved less than 1/16 of an inch. That is enough to place the drive system under protective load without creating the fault your software expects to see." The engineer stared at him in disbelief. "That is impossible." Nathan handed him a flashlight. "Please look." The young engineer knelt reluctantly beside the machine. As the beam illuminated the hidden coupling, his expression changed almost instantly. The retaining collar sat ever so slightly out of position, almost invisible unless someone knew exactly where to look. He slowly stood and looked toward Claire. "He is right," he said quietly. "I never even thought to inspect it because every electronic reading said it was fine." Claire looked from the tiny mechanical misalignment to the rusty wrench still resting in Nathan's hand, and for the first time that day, she realized the oldest tool in the factory had just revealed the one problem that millions of dollars of technology had completely overlooked. Nobody spoke as Nathan Walker carefully removed the inspection cover completely and held the small retaining collar in the palm of his hand. The polished steel ring appeared almost ordinary, yet its slight movement had brought an entire $2 billion manufacturing operation to a standstill. Claire Donovan stepped closer, watching every motion with complete attention. Around them, engineers lowered their tablets while software specialists quietly ended conference calls that had produced no answers. For the first time since the shutdown began, every eye inside the factory followed the maintenance technician carrying the rusty toolbox. Nathan gently cleaned the collar with a shop cloth before examining its inner surface beneath the bright overhead lights. "It is not damaged," he said calmly. "It simply drifted out of alignment after thousands of operating hours." The lead automation engineer frowned. "The monitoring system never detected it." Nathan nodded. "Because the sensors were measuring electrical performance. This problem began with mechanical movement long before the software noticed anything unusual." He picked up the weathered wrench that had rested inside his toolbox for decades and made one careful adjustment to the coupling assembly. Every movement was slow, deliberate, and completely without drama. He measured the alignment by sight, checked the shaft by hand, then tightened the retaining collar with steady precision. The older maintenance supervisor watched quietly before smiling to himself. "He still does it the old way," he murmured. Nathan heard him and smiled politely. "The old way still respects the laws of physics." A few nervous laughs spread through the crowd, easing the tension that had gripped the factory all afternoon. Lily stood quietly near the safety barrier, holding her father's lunch bag against her side. She had seen him repair lawn equipment for neighbors, bicycles for children, and broken appliances for elderly families without ever expecting payment. To her, this moment looked no different. He was simply helping another machine find its way back to work. Nathan stepped away from the drive assembly and looked toward Claire. You may restart the line now. The operations director hesitated before looking at the chief executive officer. Claire gave a single nod. Bring it online. A technician pressed the restart sequence from the control console. For one long second, nothing happened. Then the main drive motor turned smoothly. The massive shafts rotated with quiet confidence. Conveyor belts began moving again. Robotic arms resumed their carefully synchronized motions one after another until the entire production line awakened like a living heartbeat returning after an unexpected pause. Green status lights replaced the flashing amber warnings across every control panel. Operators looked from their monitors to one another in disbelief before applause erupted throughout the production hall. Some employees cheered openly, while others simply stood smiling, relieved beyond words. The operations director checked the performance dashboard twice before speaking. Production is fully restored, he announced. Every system is operating within normal specifications. The lead automation engineer slowly walked toward Nathan, still holding the flashlight he had used only moments earlier. I owe you an apology, he admitted quietly. I trusted the software more than I trusted experience. Nathan gently placed the rusty wrench back into its familiar place inside the toolbox. Technology is a remarkable partner, he replied. It just should never replace the habit of paying attention. Claire remained completely still as she watched the factory return to life. Her eyes settled on the faded steel toolbox resting at Nathan's feet, and she realized that the object she had dismissed as outdated had become the symbol of the only person who truly understood the heart of the machines surrounding them. Then the operations director hurried toward her carrying a worn engineering binder he had just retrieved from the company archives. Ma'am, he said quietly, opening the first page, I think there is something you need to see. The worn engineering binder rested open in Claire Donovan's hands as the sounds of the restored production line echoed once again through the enormous factory. Conveyor systems moved with renewed confidence. Robotic arms completed their synchronized motions, and green indicator lights stretched across the manufacturing floor like a wave of quiet relief. Yet Claire barely noticed any of it. Her attention remained fixed on the yellowed blueprint inside the binder. The pages showed the original mechanical architecture of the primary production system dating back more than a decade. Every major drive assembly, every alignment specification, and every critical tolerance had been documented with extraordinary precision. In the lower right corner of the first drawing, beneath the approval signatures of company executives who had long since retired, appeared one name written in bold engineering script. Nathan Walker. Claire slowly turned another page. The same signature appeared again and again. Every foundational design that made the factory's flagship production line possible carried Nathan's name as the lead systems engineer. She looked up in disbelief. Who authorized these drawings? She asked quietly. The operations director answered without hesitation. Nathan Walker did. Before Donovan Advanced Manufacturing purchased this facility, he led the engineering team that designed the entire mechanical drive system. Claire stared back at Nathan, who was calmly wiping his wrench with an old cotton cloth before returning it to its place inside the toolbox. He behaved exactly as he had before the shutdown, showing no interest in the growing attention surrounding him. Why is he working as a maintenance technician? She asked softly. The director lowered his voice. After the acquisition, several companies tried to recruit him into executive leadership. He declined every offer. Claire remained silent. Nearby, Lily quietly helped her father organize the sockets, screwdrivers, and measuring tools exactly as they had been arranged before. She smiled as she handed him a small tape measure. You almost forgot this one, she said. Nathan laughed gently. That would have made tomorrow much harder. Claire walked toward them carrying the binder. She stopped a few feet away and carefully held it open. Is this yours? She asked. Nathan glanced at the drawings and nodded with quiet simplicity. I remember those. Claire looked at him in astonishment. You designed this production line. Nathan gently closed the toolbox before answering. A remarkable team designed it together. I happen to be part of that team. Claire shook her head slowly. Your signature is on every major system. Nathan smiled. Signatures only tell you who submitted the paperwork. They never tell you how many people stayed late to solve the problems. The humility of his answer left everyone around them silent. One senior engineer quietly whispered, "He is still giving credit away." Nathan heard him and smiled. Because it still belongs to them. Claire carefully turned to the final page of the binder, where an internal memorandum remained attached. It described a promotion recommendation prepared years earlier. The position offered to Nathan had been Executive Vice President of Engineering. The recommendation ended with a handwritten note reading, "Candidate declined promotion voluntarily. Personal family priorities." Claire looked back toward Nathan. "You walked away from this?" Nathan's eyes drifted toward Lily, who had quietly taken his hand without saying a word. His expression softened with peaceful gratitude. "My wife became very sick," he said gently. "After she passed away, there was only one promotion I cared about anymore." Claire glanced at Lily before asking softly, "Which one?" Nathan squeezed his daughter's hand with quiet affection, being the father she needed every single day. No one spoke after that. The factory had resumed operating perfectly, yet the greatest revelation inside the building had nothing to do with machinery. It was the quiet realization that the man everyone believed was simply maintaining the factory had actually built the heart that kept it alive, then willingly traded an extraordinary career for the ordinary privilege of walking his little girl through life one day at a time. Nobody hurried back to work even though the production line was operating perfectly again. The machines continued their steady rhythm, filling the factory with the reassuring sound of progress. But the people standing around Nathan Walker seemed far more interested in the quiet man beside the weathered toolbox than the millions of dollars of equipment surrounding them. Claire Donovan slowly closed the engineering binder and held it against her side for a long moment before walking toward Nathan. The confidence that had defined her every decision throughout the morning had been replaced by something far more difficult for a successful leader to display: humility. She stopped in front of him while supervisors, engineers, and production workers watched in complete silence. "Mr. Walker," she said sincerely, "I owe you more than an apology." Nathan looked at her with the same calm expression that had never changed since the beginning of the day. "You do not owe me anything," he answered gently. Claire slowly shook her head. "This morning I judged your toolbox before I ever learned your story. I saw worn tools and assumed I understood the person carrying them." Nathan smiled kindly. "It happens more often than people realize." Claire lowered her eyes briefly before continuing. "I also question the value of experience simply because it did not look modern." Nathan rested one hand lightly on the old steel toolbox. "Tools wear out when they are used honestly. That is not something to be ashamed of." The simple sentence settled quietly over everyone listening. One of the younger engineers looked down at the expensive digital tablet still resting in his hands and seemed to understand that knowledge could never be measured by the price of the equipment someone carried. Claire drew a slow breath. "I spent years building this company," she admitted. "Yet today the person who saved it was someone I almost dismissed." Nathan answered without the slightest trace of pride. "You built a company that gives people opportunities. Today I simply repaired one machine." Claire smiled gently. "You repaired much more than that." Lily quietly stepped beside her father and slipped her small hand into his. She looked curiously at Claire. "Daddy says everybody deserves another chance." Claire smiled warmly at the little girl. "Your father is a very wise man." Lily shook her head with innocent certainty. "He says he is still learning." Soft laughter spread through the nearby crowd. Even Nathan laughed quietly before looking down at his daughter. "That part is definitely true." Claire looked from Lily back to Nathan. "May I ask you something?" Nathan nodded. "Of course. After everything that happened this morning, after the comments about your tools and the way people underestimated you, why did you still help without hesitation?" Nathan glanced toward the production line where hundreds of employees had already returned to work because the machines were running again. Because the people depending on those machines did not deserve to suffer for someone else's misunderstanding, he answered calmly. "Doing the right thing becomes much easier when it is no longer about protecting your pride." Claire remained silent as those words settled deeply into her heart. Nathan then looked gently at Lily before speaking once more. "Besides," he said softly, "my daughter is always watching how I treat people when they are wrong about me. One day she will face moments when someone underestimates her too. I hope she remembers that character is revealed by our response, not by someone else's opinion." No one answered. Several employees quietly lowered their eyes. Others smiled thoughtfully. Claire felt those words more deeply than any leadership seminar she had ever attended. Standing in the middle of a factory worth billions of dollars, she realized the greatest lesson of the day had come not from technology, engineering, or business, but from a quiet single father who believed that dignity never needed to raise its voice to be remembered. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the high factory windows as normal production finally settled into its familiar rhythm again. The tension that had filled the building only an hour earlier had faded, replaced by quiet conversations that traveled from workstation to workstation. Every employee seemed to be sharing the same story. The maintenance technician with the rusty toolbox had solved the one problem that advanced software and outside consultants could not explain. Nathan Walker, however, treated the attention no differently than he had treated the criticism. He simply picked up his toolbox, thanked the operators who had helped clear the work area, and prepared to return to the maintenance schedule waiting on his clipboard. Claire Donovan watched him in disbelief. She had expected someone with Nathan's background to accept the recognition, answer questions, or remind everyone of his accomplishments. Instead, he acted as though nothing extraordinary had happened. "Mr. Walker," she called before he could leave. Nathan turned with a patient smile. "Yes." Claire walked toward him carrying the engineering binder beneath one arm. "Would you join me in the executive conference room for a few minutes?" Nathan glanced at the maintenance schedule clipped to his clipboard before answering. "If it will not take too long. I still have preventive inspections to finish before the evening shift begins." Several managers exchanged surprised looks. One quietly whispered, "He is worried about inspections after saving the entire factory." Claire noticed their expressions and smiled softly. "The inspections can wait," she said. Nathan gently shook his head. "Machines usually cannot." The answer drew respectful smiles from several maintenance employees who understood exactly what he meant. Claire nodded with quiet admiration. "Then I will walk with you." As they crossed the production floor together, workers who had never spoken to Nathan before greeted him with sincere respect. Some thanked him personally. Others simply nodded as he passed. Nathan returned every greeting with the same warmth he had shown long before anyone knew his history. He never walked faster because people recognized him, and he never walked slower to enjoy the attention. Lily skipped happily beside her father, smiling every time another employee waved at her. One older machinist bent down and said, "Your father is quite a remarkable man." Lily smiled proudly, but answered with complete sincerity, "He says the remarkable part is when people help each other." The machinist laughed gently. "That sounds exactly like something he would say." Claire heard the conversation and found herself smiling. The farther they walked, the more she realized Nathan had quietly earned something far more valuable than authority. He had earned trust. Employees from every department greeted him not because of an impressive title, but because they knew he would always stop to help without expecting recognition in return. When they reached another aging machine near the back of the facility, Nathan paused and listened for several seconds before making a small note on his clipboard. Claire looked at him curiously. "Another problem?" Nathan nodded. "Not yet. It will probably need a bearing replaced within 2 weeks." Claire looked surprised. "You can tell that without opening the machine?" Nathan smiled. "Every machine has a voice. Most people only start listening after it begins shouting." Claire stood quietly as those words settled into her thoughts. She realized that Nathan spoke about more than equipment. The lesson applied just as easily to people. Pain, exhaustion, loneliness, and discouragement often whispered long before they became impossible to ignore. She slowly looked across the factory filled with hundreds of employees and understood that leadership required listening before problems became emergencies. As Nathan quietly continued toward his next inspection, with Lily walking faithfully beside him, Claire made a silent promise to herself that the culture of Donovan Advanced Manufacturing would never again overlook quiet wisdom simply because it arrived carrying an old steel toolbox instead of an impressive title. The next morning, the atmosphere inside Donovan Advanced Manufacturing felt noticeably different. Employees who usually hurried past one another paused to exchange greetings. Supervisors stopped to thank maintenance crews before daily inspections began. Even the conversations sounded calmer, as though one difficult afternoon had quietly reminded everyone that respect could be just as valuable as efficiency. Nathan Walker arrived before sunrise carrying the same weathered steel toolbox in one hand and a travel mug of black coffee in the other. Nothing about his routine had changed. He unlocked the maintenance office, reviewed the inspection schedule, and began preparing for another ordinary day. Lily hugged him before leaving for school with a neighbor who worked nearby. "Have a good day, Daddy," she said with a bright smile. Nathan gently straightened her backpack. "You do the same. Remember that learning is more important than proving you are the smartest person in the room." Lily nodded happily. "Because there is always someone who can teach you something." Nathan smiled with quiet pride. "Exactly right." After she left, he picked up his clipboard and headed toward the first inspection of the morning. Before he reached the production floor, Claire Donovan stepped into the hallway carrying a small envelope and the worn engineering binder. She had arrived early as well, but not for a meeting with investors or executives. She had come looking for one employee. "Good morning, Nathan," she said warmly. Nathan returned the greeting with the same calm courtesy he offered everyone else. Claire held out the envelope. "This belongs to you." Nathan accepted it and opened it carefully. Inside was the faded employee recognition card he had received years earlier when the company changed ownership. The edges had become worn with age, but someone had cleaned it and placed it inside a protective holder overnight. Nathan looked at Claire with quiet curiosity. "Thank you." Claire gently held up the engineering binder. "I spent most of last night reading these original design records." Nathan smiled modestly. "There are some very talented names in that binder." Claire nodded. "There are. But I also discovered something else." She opened the final page and pointed to a handwritten note left by the previous company president. Nathan read the familiar words silently before closing the binder again. Claire spoke softly. "He wrote that your greatest strength was never your engineering ability. He believed your greatest gift was the way you made everyone around you better." Nathan stood quietly for a moment before answering. "He was a generous man." Claire shook her head gently. "He was an honest one." Just then, several employees walked past on their way to the morning shift. One by one, they greeted Nathan by name. Some thanked him again for saving production. Others simply wished him a good morning. Nathan answered every greeting with the same warm smile, never allowing admiration to change the way he treated anyone. Claire watched those small moments unfold and understood something that no financial report could ever measure. Leadership was not created by titles hanging on office doors. It was built one respectful conversation at a time until people trusted both your skill and your character. As Nathan prepared to continue his inspections, Claire looked across the busy factory floor where hundreds of employees were beginning another day's work. The machines sounded exactly as they had before the shutdown, yet the people did not. Pride had become quieter. Gratitude had become louder. And resting beside the boots of the man who had asked for nothing in return remained the same old steel toolbox, scratched by years of honest work, carrying simple tools that had never needed to impress anyone because they had always been willing to serve.